Are you a man? Do you struggle with loneliness? Who are your heroes? Not counting people you know personally, are any of your heroes a different gender than you? We hear a lot today about the crisis of male loneliness, and everyone's looking for a solution. Hopefully, a solution grounded in empathy and justice. But can we not also ground that solution in the stories we tell? It is said, young men today need heroes in media to feel seen, to help give them a sense of purpose and meaning and belonging. Yet, we men tend to resist any depiction of heroism that doesn't look like us. Maybe there's a connection between that resistance and our loneliness. Maybe expanding our definition of who can count as our hero will help us cultivate a virtuous life where we are never lonely, even when we're alone. And maybe our stories got there a long time ago, longer than we think, and all we have to do is pay attention. New times need new stories, new heroes, new virtues, tied to our mythic past but looking always ahead towards the next turn of the weird. These are the gods and heroes of the modern age. This is the new mythology. All stories change. They always have, right from the beginning. With every retelling of a tale, a little bit of change sneaks in, sometimes on purpose through deliberate intent of the storyteller, other times through the invisible hand of evolution, the only truly universal constant. This wasn't often something people complained about before capitalism codified concepts like canon, IP, lore, and world building. It was just the way things worked. Each time a story got retold, there would be subtle changes to characters or themes or settings, often crafted to meet the needs of a specific audience, or teach a specific lesson, or flatter a particular ruler. And like all evolutionary processes, changes would accrete over time, even as some core traits were conserved, so that eventually the extant version of the story bore little overall resemblance to its ancestor, even if experts could still find the ancestral kernels preserved within it across generations. This story evolution process never really stops, not even under the pressures of capitalism's attempts to enclose the commons of our imagination in things like canon, IP, lore, and world building. Like all of evolution, the process churns out a lot of mistakes, but as a reward, it sometimes also produces masterpieces. Masterpieces like Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings movie trilogy. Contrary to what you may have heard, Jackson's films made substantial changes to Tolkien's original story so that it could fit the format of film and conform to the director's specific vision of the story. These included changes to fundamental story elements like characters' relationships and motivations, timelines, themes, locations, and even which dialogue was spoken by which characters and when and why. These were changes that, in the view of Tolkien's heirs, undermined the author's philosophical and spiritual themes and turned The Lord of the Rings into a simplistic action story for teenagers. Tolkien's son, Christopher, disavowed the movies entirely, so offended was he by what Jackson had done. Now, I happen to think that Christopher Tolkien was being way too hard on Peter Jackson. There is still a lot of Tolkien in Jackson's movies. But it is also true that many of the changes Jackson made did give his version of the story a fundamentally different point of view from the author's original vision, whether Jackson intended that or not. None of these changes prevented the films from being great, of course. The third installment, The Return of the King, won 11 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Arguably, the films were great because of these changes, not in spite of them. These changes updated the story to be more relatable to modern audience sensibilities, both aesthetic and moral. And one of the best examples of this is the subplot about Éowyn's and Merry's mutual journey to and participation in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. The changes made here between book and film infuse Éowyn's and Merry's story with completely different themes from those Tolkien intended, themes that reflected the sensibilities of Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens, and the gender politics of the time at which these films were made. And those new themes still have resonance and relevance for us today, more than 20 years later. When we first meet the film version of Éowyn, Miranda Otto's performance presents us with an ambitious, studious woman skilled in the manly arts of war, but restrained by the patriarchal bonds of her culture. Frustrated by what she sees as unfair restrictions and anxious to prove herself among the male warriors of Rohan, Éowyn's arc doesn't really begin until she meets Aragorn, the first man to ever truly recognize and validate her skill and worth. That's probably why she got a crush on him.
Well, he is dreamy.
Merry, for his part, has just emerged from the adventure of the Battle of Isengard with a thirst for more. And by the time he meets Éowyn in The Return of the King, he is primed to pursue his own heroic arc, especially after having to bid farewell to his best friend Pippin. And like Éowyn, Merry finds his ambition stymied by the strict expectations of Rohan's culture and Rohan's king.
Little hobbits do not belong in war, Master Meriadoc.
I want to fight!
I will say no more.
Éowyn and Merry have much in common. Both are shunned for their ambition to step outside the bounds of Rohan's strict hierarchy. Both want to fight and earn their glory. Both have recently lost a great love. For Merry, Pippin, who has been sent away for the safety of Rohan. For Éowyn, Aragorn, who has confessed that he cannot love her the way she wishes. And so these two heartbroken souls with an ambition to prove their worth are drawn together and form a conspiracy of virtue, an alliance to support one another through the trials to come, an alliance that strengthens them both through hellish battle and the vanquishing of the terrible Witch King of Angmar. It's a wonderful subplot, arguably one of the most inspirational in the entire movie trilogy. Especially in the extended edition, it's full of magnificent scenes of their love for one another as they secretly navigate their mutual quest for glory, honor, and valor. And almost none of this is in the books. The big plot points are all there, of course. Theoden denies Merry his chance for honor. Éowyn disguises herself as a man so she can fight. Éowyn kills the Witch King. But all of the stuff in between, the connective tissue that holds them all together, is completely different in the books. For starters, Éowyn's timeline is significantly shifted around. The conversation she shares with Aragorn upon first meeting him in the movie version of The Two Towers doesn't happen in the books until well into The Return of the King, when Aragorn is about to depart for the paths of the dead at Dunharrow, along with the Grey Company. By moving this conversation about Éowyn's fear of a cage and desire to fight to much earlier in the story, Jackson gave Éowyn a longer character arc that makes the boss fight against the Witch King a more emotionally satisfying payoff for the audience. But the most impactful thematic changes lie in the details of Éowyn's and Merry's path to the Pelennor Fields. In the book, when the disguised Éowyn scoops up Merry onto horseback as the Rohirrim depart for battle, Mary does not see through the disguise at all.
I received you for your safe keeping, answered Theoden, and also to do as I might bid. None of my riders can bear you as burden. If the battle were before my gates, maybe your deeds would be remembered by the minstrels, but it is 100 leagues and 2 to Mundburg, where Denethor is lord. I will say no more. Mary bowed and went away unhappily, and stared at the lines of horsemen. Already the companies were preparing to start. Men were tightening girths, looking to saddles, caressing their horses. Some gazed uneasily at the lowering sky. Unnoticed, a rider came up and spoke softly in the hobbit's ear. "Where will wants not, a way opens, so we say," he whispered, "and so I have found myself." Mary looked up and saw that it was the young rider whom he had noticed in the morning. "You wish to go whither the Lord of the Mark goes. I see it in your face." "I do," said Mary. "Then you shall go with me," said the rider. "I will bear you before me, under my cloak, until we are far afield, and this darkness is yet darker. Such goodwill should not be denied. Say no more to any man, but come." "Thank you, indeed," said Mary. "Thank you, sir, though I do not know your name." "Do you not?" said the rider softly. "Then call me Dernhelm."
And this remains true for their entire journey, right up until Éowyn's big reveal when confronting the Witch King. No one in the book version of the story, not even Mary, who'd been sharing a horse with her, saw through Éowyn's disguise until that moment.
But Theoden was not utterly forsaken. The knights of his house lay slain about him, or else mastered by the madness of their steeds were borne far away. Yet one stood there still, Dernhelm the Young, faithful beyond fear, and he wept, for he had loved his lord as a father. Right through the charge Mary had been borne unarmed behind him, until the shadow came, and then Windfola had thrown them in his terror, and now ran wild upon the plain. Mary crawled on all fours like a dazed beast, and such a horror was on him that he was blind and sick. King's man, his heart cried within him. You must stand by him. As a father you shall be to me, you said. But his will made no answer, and his body shook. He dared not open his eyes or look up. Then, out of the blackness in his mind, he thought that he heard Dernhelm speaking, yet now the voice seemed strange, recalling some other voice that he had known. "Begone, foul Dwymelake, lord of Carrion! Leave the dead in peace!" A cold voice answered, "Come not between the Nazgul and his prey, or he will not slay thee in thy turn. He will bear thee away to the houses of lamentation, beyond all darkness, where thy flesh shall be devoured, and thy shriveled mind be left naked to the lidless eye." A sword rang as it was drawn. "Do what you will, but I will hinder it, if I may." "Hinder me? Thou fool! No living man may hinder me." Then Mary heard of all sounds in that hour the strangest. It seemed that Dernhelm laughed, and the clear voice was like the ring of steel. "But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Éowyn I am, Éomen's daughter. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Begone if you be not deathless, for living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him." The winged creature screamed at her, but the ringwraith made no answer and was silent, as if in sudden doubt. Very amazement for a moment conquered Mary's fear. He opened his eyes, and the blackness was lifted from them. There, some paces from him, sat the great beast, and all seemed dark about it, and above it loomed the Nazgul lord like a shadow of despair. A little to the left, facing them, stood she whom he had called Dernhelm, but the helm of her secrecy had fallen from her, and her bright hair, released from its bonds, gleamed with pale gold upon her shoulders. Her eyes, grey as the sea, were hard and fell, and yet tears were on her cheek. A sword was in her hand, and she raised her shield against the horror of her enemy's eyes. Éowyn it was, and Dernhelm also, for into Mary's mind flashed the memory of the face that he saw at the riding from Dunharrow, the face of one that goes seeking death, having no hope. Pity filled his heart, and great wonder, and suddenly the slow-kindled courage of his race awoke. He clenched his hand. She should not die, so fair, so desperate. At least she should not die alone, unaided.
So, in the books, Éowyn's disguise as Dernhelm fools everyone, and thus her ruse is a lone deception. Whereas in the films, Mary recognizes her through her disguise immediately, and becomes her accomplice in the ruse. And Jackson fills out the narrative space of this subplot with scenes of Éowyn and Mary bonding, and advocating for each other to those who would prevent them from joining the fight. The net result of these changes between book and film is a pronounced thematic shift From a lone but ultimately righteous deception by Éowyn in the books to a scheme in the films between two characters trapped by a social and political system that unfairly prevents them from leading lives of heroic virtue. Movie Éowyn and Mary, by this point in the story, are also both profoundly lonely characters. Though surrounded by thousands of people who share a common interest in survival and a common commitment to the good, they have each become isolated because of stereotypes attached to their immutable characteristics. For Éowyn, her sex and gender, and for Mary, his race and body type, which could be coded contextually as a disability.
I do not doubt his heart, only the reach of his arm.
And they have each recently been divided from someone they loved deeply. They cure their loneliness by forming an intersectional bond and forging ahead through the unfair barriers that Rohan society throws up before them, a bond that takes them all the way to victory over the Witch King and beyond. In the book version of this story, it is Mary, not Éowyn, who comforts the dying King Theoden after the battle. The king thus dies never knowing that Éowyn had earned her valor. But in the film, it is Éowyn who comforts the king as he goes to his father's. He passes away knowing she fought bravely and saved his life, however little of it he had left. And his parting actions convey his approval of her participation and imply the transfer of both the moral and political mantle of Rohan's kingship to her. This ultimately validates her and Mary's alliance and absolves them of the deception they carried out. The foundation of Éowyn's and Mary's alliance is a deep, transcendent form of affection that does more than console them. It liberates them. It is clear, especially in the extended editions of the films, that Éowyn and Mary have come to love one another deeply. And the love they share is not romantic. It's definitely not sexual, nor is it even merely filial. It's a love that is not simply loyalty. It is solidarity. In modern colloquialism, some might call their love platonic, but I think it's more accurately described as Aristotelian. The Greek philosopher Aristotle defined 3 kinds of relationships between people: relationships of utility, relationships of pleasure, and relationships of virtue. Relationships of utility are based on matters of practicality. These might be things like business endeavors, workplace collaborations, or other arrangements where each person involved acquires some mutual benefit. These kinds of relationships are always transitory, even if those involved genuinely like each other, because their foundation is always just transactional. Relationships of pleasure are based on a shared source of enjoyment. Each person is involved because they enjoy the same things as the others, or even the personalities of the others. Examples would include a sports club, or a weekly gaming group, or even casual dating. These kinds of relationships can last a long time, but are often transitory as well, because they depend on the enjoyment each person involved derives from the arrangement. When it stops being fun, the relationship of pleasure dissolves. Relationships of virtue, in Aristotle's view, are the most fulfilling and transcendent. These are relationships based on mutual commitment to one another's moral development and a respect for the other people for their own sake. Those in a relationship of virtue not only support one another in seeking what is good for each of them, but also support one another in their mutual pursuit of the good for its own sake. Virtue is the point, and seeking it together promotes the flourishing of everyone involved.
It is in this way more than any other that even unequals can be friends. They can be equalized. Now equality and likeness are friendship, and especially the likeness of those who are like in virtue. For being steadfast in themselves, they hold fast to each other, and neither ask nor give base services, but even prevent them. For it is characteristic of good men neither to go wrong themselves, nor to let their friends do so.
This is the kind of relationship Éowyn and Mary have entered, an alliance in which they each respect one another's humanity for its own sake, and support one another selflessly in their mutual pursuit of courage, honor, and valor. This conspiracy of virtue flattens the otherwise unequal social relations between them, and allows them to push through the unfair social relations that prevent them, and others like them, from being able to make that same pursuit of moral excellence. At no point in this relationship are either Éowyn or Mary concerned with whether Éowyn conforms to the traditional gender norms of Rohan. They merely seek together the good for its own sake, and refuse together to be denied their intrinsic right to seek it, even if that means they have to temporarily deceive those around them. They know that seeking virtue together will see them through. And they're right. This conspiracy of virtue leads directly to the defeat of the Witch King. The message couldn't be clearer. Men and women who lay aside the gender expectations of society together can achieve great things for and with each other, even achieve the most important victory in the battle that wages around them. And to do that, they must be able to be heroes to each other. In Jackson's version of The Lord of the Rings, Éowyn is Mary's hero, not despite the fact that she defies the gender norms of Rohan society, but because she does. Indeed, if she had not done so, she could never have become heroic at all. Neither Tolkien nor Jackson conjured their visions of Éowyn from the ether. Both the Éowyn who stands alone to embody courage and valor, as in Tolkien's version of the story, and the Éowyn who mentors or allies with the male hero, as in Jackson's version of the story, are drawn from deep mythological and historical roots. Girlbosses, for lack of a better term, have been with us for a long, long time, possibly since the beginning. And that is a good thing.
That girl, she got her head up so high. I think I wanna be her best friend, yeah.
Tolkien famously wrote of Galadriel in Letter 348 that she was possessed of an Amazon disposition in her youth. But his sources of inspiration for Éowyn are less clear. He was obviously aware of tales of warrior women in ancient mythology, most famously the Amazons of Greek myth, and these tales almost certainly shaped his depiction of Éowyn in some way. We know that one other woman in his legendarium, Haleth, an early First Age leader of the race of men and namesake of the House of Haleth, led her people through an orc siege for a week after the death of her father and brother. Tolkien explicitly described Haleth as an Amazon, and told us that her people were known for having an ancient tradition of female warriors, so it seems pretty plausible that ancient real-world tales of the Amazons provided at least some inspiration to Tolkien and to Jackson in their portrayals of Éowyn. The Amazons, of course, are the archetypal mythic examples of warrior women. Almost every ancient Greek male hero of note, Achilles, Bellerophon, Heracles, Theseus, had at some point to prove their worth by defeating an Amazon in battle. The ancient Greeks, and later the Romans, were perversely fascinated by tales of warrior women.
Death! By Snoo Snoo!
Yeah!
What are you, gay?
Largely because their own societies were rigidly patriarchal and glimpses of other ways of arranging gender roles threatened their social order. At the time Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings and worked on his wider legendarium behind the scenes, most people believed that the Amazons were purely fictional. But recent archaeology and scholarship conducted since the professor sailed to the west have shown that ancient Amazon tales were at least partially inspired by ancient Greek contact with the people they called the Scythians and later the Sarmatians. These were a nomadic people of the Pontic steppes north of the Black Sea who had a high degree of gender equality in their society, especially compared to the conservative Greeks. This included women who took roles as hunters and warriors. Archaeology in the region has discovered multiple graves of women, possibly as many as 1 in 3, buried with warrior remnant who had skeletal wounds and deformation consistent with warfare. And recent studies of the oral histories of the Scythians' modern descendant cultures have shown that they have a long mythic tradition of women living more or less as equal in their ancient societies, including in roles as mythic heroes. These findings have forced us to integrate our own mythologies with reality in a way that, ironically, is only catching us up to the ancient Greeks, who had already done this integration work 2,500 years ago. Greek historians had already written of Amazons as if they were semi-historical in multiple nonfiction sources. My favorite example comes from Herodotus, the father of history in the West. He relates a tale of how the Sarmatians came to have, from his conservative Greek point of view, such weird levels of women's equality. As he tells it, a group of Amazons who'd been taken captive in a war and were put on a slave ship mutinied. They slew all their captors and found themselves adrift on the Black Sea. Luckily, they came ashore near Sarmatian lands, stole the first horses they came upon, and proceeded to raid the countryside. Local leaders at first tried to defeat them in battle, but failing this, made a heel turn and decided instead to offer their youngest sons to the Amazons as husbands. The Amazons accepted the peace offer, but ultimately gave their husbands the choice to either return to their own people or follow their Amazon wives across the river to establish their own lands. The husbands chose to go with their Amazon wives, and according to Herodotus,
ever since then, the women of the Sarmatians have followed their ancient ways. They ride out hunting, with their men or without them. They go to war, and dress the same as men. In regard to marriage, it is the custom that no maiden weds until she has killed a man of the enemy, and some of them grow old and die unmarried because they cannot fulfill the law.
Herodotus here is integrating mythic stories of Amazons with historical observations of how a society contemporaneous with his own treated their women. And recent science has validated the historical parts of his narrative. The Greeks were not the only male-dominated culture in ancient Europe to be baffled and intrigued by more egalitarian societies on their imperial fringes. The Romans, too, told many tales in their histories about encounters with ferocious warrior women among the Celtic and Germanic peoples. The late Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus gives us a vivid, humorous description of kickboxing Gaulish women that is typical of these kinds of passing but lurid remarks.
Almost all Gauls are tall and fair-skinned with reddish hair. Their savage eyes make them fearful objects. They are eager to quarrel and excessively truculent. When in the course of a dispute any of them calls in his wife, a creature with gleaming eyes, much stronger than her husband, they are more than a match for a whole group of foreigners, especially when the woman, with swollen neck and gnashing teeth, swings her great white arms and begins to deliver a rain of punches mixed with kicks, like missiles launched by the twisted strings of a catapult.
It is a near certainty, of course, that the Greeks and Romans embellished these accounts in order to entertain and titillate their readers, as well as to perform more than a bit of propaganda. They wrote from an outsider's perspective about these cultures and often went out of their way to otherize them for political purposes. But the Gauls, the Scythians, and other so-called barbarians had their own oral histories and storytelling traditions. And with modern scholarship now confirming some parts of the Greek and Roman accounts, as well as reconstructing the Scythian and Sarmatian mythic histories from surviving oral traditions, it is plausible to assume that these more egalitarian ancient cultures probably had heroic tales close in tone and theme to Jackson's version of Éowyn and Mary. Indeed, there may be surviving hints of a narrative tradition about female heroes mentoring and or allying with male heroes in one of the most famous stories from Irish mythology, the tale of Cuchulainn and Scahach. Cuchulainn is a sort of Irish Achilles or Heracles, a tragic demigod who achieves great deeds only to end up undone by his own hubris. He's also an ancient analog of the Hulk, possessed of the power to turn into an invincible rage monster at the most unpredictable of times. But that's a tale for another day. Early in his heroic career, Cuchulainn met and courted Emer, the daughter of an Irish lord named Forgol Monarch. And please bear with me, there's a lot of backstory I'm skipping here in the interest of time. If you want the full tales of Cuchulainn, you should begin by listening to the Irish Mythology podcast. Finding reliable print translations of these tales into modern English can be tricky. Anyway, Forgol opposed Cuchulainn's courtship of his daughter and tricked the hero into undertaking a quest he was sure would get Cuchulainn killed. As a condition for Emer's hand in marriage, Cuchulainn would have to first travel to Scotland and learn all the arts of war from the great warrior woman Scahach. And what follows next is a story that would make one hell of a good martial arts movie. Cuchulainn survives many hardships to reach Scahach's fighting school, whose name translates literally as the Fortress of Shadows. Once there, he almost immediately kicks the asses of all her best students, and her daughter, naturally, falls in love with him. All of this impresses Scahach so much that she takes him on as her star pupil and agrees to teach him her most secret fighting techniques. In some versions of the story, she also bangs him, providing a sort of passage into manhood. In other versions, not so much. Either way, Cuchulainn becomes intensely loyal to Scahach. After he masters all she can teach him in less than a year, Scahach gifts him with the great magical spear, the Gaia Bolga, a weapon that can explode into thorns inside a target's body. Which is great timing because a rival fight school run by Scahach's twin sister, Aoife, decides to fuck around and find out.
You want to find out? Huh?
Aoife's school is sort of the Cobra Kai to Scahach's Miyagi-Do. Or maybe that's the other way around. It's sometimes hard to tell who the good guys are in these ancient stories. The Irish myths don't tell us anything about the source of the two schools' rivalry, only that it had been brewing for a long time before Cuchulainn showed up, and that Scahach had not told any of her students about it, not even Cuchulainn. So, when shit hits the fan, Scahach tries to spare Cuchulainn from the battle by slipping him a potion strong enough to put 12 men to sleep for a whole day. But thanks to the raging spirit that dwells within him, the potion only puts him to sleep for an hour. When he wakes up, he hears the sounds of battle and comes outside to see what the flip is going on. He rushes in and quickly slays Cobra Kai Aoife's 3 best champions, and this drives Aoife mad with rage, so she rushes in and challenges Scahach to single combat to settle this shit once and for all. But Cuchulainn ain't having that, so he steps up and challenges Aoife in Scahach's place. Then they fight, she almost kills him, then he tricks her and wins. And this forces her to surrender and make permanent peace with Scahach's Miyagi-Do. And as part of the peace agreement, Aoife has to let Cuchulainn, put a baby in her, which she does, and this becomes the basis of his later downfall due to hubris.
Death! By Snoo!
Yeah! What are you, gay?
But that's a tale for another day. What's striking about this ancient myth compared to Greco-Roman sources is how sympathetically it portrays warrior women. Rather than being otherized as barbarian freaks or scheming witches or enemy queens to be vanquished, In Irish myth, warrior women are comrades, lovers, and mentors for the male hero. Sometimes also the enemy queen or goddess to be vanquished, sure, but not by default. Irish stories make space within the parent culture for female characters who embody the classically heroic traits typically reserved for male heroes in Greek and Roman myths and histories. The Irish mythic cycle evolved out of an older and broader Celtic cultural heritage shared with other Celtic groups like the Gauls and the Galatians, which probably explains the common feature of warrior women being treated at least somewhat more sympathetically in story and real life than they got treated by the Greeks and Romans of the day. Celtic and Scythian cultures developed outside the hegemony of more rigidly patriarchal societies for centuries, and it shows. All of which is to say, that's why it's weird for so many content creators today to be complaining about so-called girl bosses as if they're something new, something being forced into traditional storytelling by modern political activists. It all begs the question, whose tradition? These content creators' objection is not really to any modern concept of gender. It's a defense of one ancient cultural tradition of storytelling over and against an equally ancient cultural tradition that tells different stories about gender. And it's the thesis of this video that other ancient tradition, the one that celebrates and embraces female heroes being mentors and or allies for male heroes who don't find any of this weird, is maybe the one we should be returning to if we care about solving the crisis of male loneliness. The cure for loneliness, male or otherwise, is connection and community, sustained by emotional bonds and acts of mutual aid. The problem all of us face is that we're all trapped together inside an unjust social hierarchy that denies all of us the ability to pursue a flourishing life of heroic virtue, or even simple virtue. The forces making men lonely are making everyone else lonely too. And one of the main ways they're doing that is by selling us one ancient tradition and telling us that the other equally ancient tradition is actually a modern invention designed to destroy us. Loyalty to that narrative, in the form of imposing rigid gender roles on our heroic stories, will only dig us deeper into the pit of loneliness. To be truly free and no longer lonely, we have to be able to form what Aristotle called relationships of virtue with people of different genders, because they're all trapped and lonely too. And we can't form relationships of virtue if we keep demanding that other genders only ever belong with us in relationships of utility or pleasure, or not at all. We have to be able to be Jackson's Mary to Jackson's ÉOWYN. We have to be able to have female heroes to whom we are not related and whom we don't want to fuck. Female heroes who embody the classic heroic virtues and inspire us to do the same. So, to close out this video, I'll briefly tell you about 3 of my female heroes. I encourage you to study history, literature, and politics to find your own, and tell us about them in the comments section.
That girl, she holds her head up so high. I think I wanna be her best friend, yeah.
First up is my girl Boudica, queen mother of the Iceni tribe. During the Roman occupation of Britain, the British outside of Rome were a scattered network of tribes governed by kings, who typically squabbled between themselves and jockeyed against each other for favor with the empire. Boudica's husband, Prasutagus, was no different. He was an independent ally of Rome among the British tribes, and he left his lands to both the Roman emperor and to his own daughters in his will. When he died, Rome, of course, ignored his will, because they're Rome, and they just came in and annexed his lands by force. And this was par for the course with Romans, because they're fucking Romans, but it was especially so under their emperor at the time, Nero. According to multiple classical sources, the Romans had Boudica flogged when she protested this action, and they essayed her daughters in front of her. And based on all of their prior experience, the Romans expected that this would be the end of it. And boy, did they get that one wrong.
You obviously do not know who you are fucking with!
Rather than capitulating to Rome, Boudica went on the warpath in either the year 60 or 61 CE. She united several previously rival British tribes and brought down the thunder on Rome. Her armies defeated the Romans in multiple battles, burned 3 Roman settlements, including the future London, to the ground, and forced Nero to consider withdrawing from Britain completely. Sadly, she lost the final battle against Rome and unalived herself. But had she won, it is likely that the Romans would have abandoned Britain altogether centuries ahead of time. This was one of those rare cases where a single battle turned the tide of all history that followed. Boudica was a real woman hero in the grand ancient Celtic tradition of warrior women mentoring or allying with male heroes. Next up is Lydia Vladimirovna Litviak, the world's first female ace pilot. For those who don't know, an ace is a fighter pilot who's credited with 5 or more enemy shoot-downs all to themselves without assistance from other fighters. During World War II, the Soviet Union allowed women to engage in frontline combat activities, including sniping and aerial combat. Lydia rose quickly through the ranks and eventually became a free hunter, a fighter pilot who searches for enemy targets on their own initiative. And she became known to the Nazis as the dreaded White Lily of Stalingrad because she had a white flower painted on the fuselage of her Yak-1 fighter plane. Historians credit Lydia with 14 to 15 confirmed solo shoot-downs of Nazi planes, and during 2 years of service she became the first female pilot to ever shoot down an enemy aircraft, one of the first 2 female ace pilots, and the holder of the record for the largest number of enemy planes ever shot down by a female fighter pilot. Lydia finally met her match during the Battle of Kursk on 1st August 1943, when up to 8 German fighter planes broke off from protective formation of a bomber plane just to go after her. And she took one of them with her. Lydia was only 21 years old when she was killed. The third and final example is not a single person, but an alliance of women that's still going on. Survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's child trafficking network banded together earlier this week, at the time of this writing, to announce that they will be compiling their own list of the names of their abusers. They made this announcement in a press conference outside the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and on several other platforms, as part of a media blitz meant to force Congress's hand on voting to release the Epstein files. They were accompanied at their press conference by 4 members of Congress, Democrat Ro Khanna and Republicans Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Nancy Mace. Thus far, the only Republicans to stand publicly with Epstein's victims rather than with President Trump. Greene and Massie both promised to read the survivors' list of names into the congressional record. I hope they follow through on that, no matter whose names end up on the list, and that Epstein's survivors finally get some measure of justice after being screwed over by the system for so long. It takes a lot of courage to stand up to such powerful people, and I genuinely admire these women for banding together to do it. They have more balls than basically any Republican politician, and most of the Democratic ones too. So, I've kept you long enough. Thanks for watching to the end of this video, and I hope you found it interesting and entertaining, and that you will look back on it the next time you see a grifter on YouTube complaining about girl bosses. These guys just don't know what they're missing. They like to complain that representation shouldn't be needed for women and other marginalized people to be inspired by straight white male heroes on screen. And they're right, technically, But they overlook the fact that such people already have been seeing themselves reflected in white male heroes for centuries now. So the least straight white men can do is do the same thing in reverse. Now that more woman heroes and other heroes of other identities are appearing in our media. If you're unable to be inspired by so-called girl boss characters, if your first reaction to seeing a female hero on screen is to immediately call them a girl boss and think that they're an attack on traditional masculine storytelling, well then maybe you're clinging to the wrong tradition. Thanks for watching. Before you go, be sure to make all the appropriate offerings to the great god algorithm, likes, subs, shares, etc. And until next time, remember that what is best in life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and engage in discourse with the women.
He is dreamy.